In John Carpenter's Halloween, Laurie Strode and her friends are being stalked by the boogeyman himself. And while overcoming such a threat has rightfully earned her iconic status in the horror community, we decided to take a closer look at Laurie's actions, skills, and decisions that ultimately led to her survival. For every good decision or outcome, there's potential for an equally bad one, so we're scoring them with point values of 1, 5, or 10, based on their positive or negative nature and overall severity. My name's Evan from Horror Heads, and this is Survivor Rating. With no known horror survival experience up to this point, and being faced with an enemy who's often referred to as It by his psychiatrist, we gave this teenage babysitter a projected survival rating of 20 out of 100 as she faces down evil in the shape of a man. We first meet Laurie around the film's 12-minute mark, on a pleasant Halloween morning in Haddonfield as she leaves for school. She's reminded by her dad to drop off a key at the Myers house that he's selling later that day. She promises not to forget and proceeds on her walk. Along the way, she bumps into Tommy Doyle, the neighbor kid who she babysits, and he asks if they can carve pumpkins and watch scary movies later that night, and she agrees. But as they approach the Myers house, Tommy warns her to stay away because it's haunted. He says he heard terrible things happened here, and he's referring to the murder of Judith Myers, who was stabbed to death in his house on Halloween 15 years ago. Her younger brother Michael grabbed a kitchen knife, waited until she was alone, and headed upstairs to make his half-naked sister his first victim. 6-year-old Michael showed no signs of remorse for his actions, so he was admitted into Illinois State Hospital under the care of Dr. Sam Loomis, a psychiatrist who we'll learn more about later. But Laurie's the final girl, so she shrugs this urban legend off as childish and walks up the stoop to deliver the key just as promised. And Tommy gives her one of these looks while she does it. But what she doesn't know is that this urban legend is actually true, and last night her future stalker made his escape by scaring a nurse right out of her car to make it home just in time for his favorite holiday. So she heads to school not realizing that she's now being followed, while Dr. Loomis wonders the same thing as all of us, which is how in the hell Michael learned how to drive. Or if you're like me, you're more curious about this little maneuver. In class, Laurie gazes out the window while being lectured on fate. This is when she notices the white-faced figure for the first time standing behind that nurse's car. She even does a double take and he's for sure 100% definitely still standing there. The teacher calls on her, snapping her out of her gaze, and she gives a surprisingly insightful answer to the question, but makes her first mistake in not at all mentioning the masked creep staring down a school full of children. Halloween or not, this kind of behavior is strange in any location, but especially at a place like a school. Telling an adult is the obvious move here, and doing so might have alerted the authorities to Michael's general description and whereabouts. She could have potentially saved herself a lot of trouble, or at least prevented things like Tommy being followed home from school or this kid being grabbed by the escaped killer. Even if it was one of those little bully kids who did that weird boogeyman chant and broke Tommy's pumpkin. Dr. Loomis, who's hot on the trail, stops to call the police, where he finds Michael's hospital gown and narrowly misses this body. School's out for Laurie, so she and her friends Annie and Linda walk each other home and engage in small talk when Laurie remembers she forgot her chemistry book back at school. She stops to consider going back for it when she notices that same car that she had seen outside of her classroom window now turning the corner towards them. As he passes, Annie yells,
"Hey, jerk! Speed kills!"
So he stops for a moment but then drives on. The trio continues on their way, making plans for the night, realizing that the kids they're babysitting only live 3 houses down from each other, so they can keep each other company. Laurie and Annie part ways with Linda and continue together, but they don't go far before Laurie notices the man from the classroom window and from the car who just sped past them now peeping at her again, this time from behind a bush just ahead. So she speaks up and tells Annie to go check behind that bush because she saw someone standing back there. And sure enough, when she checks, he's gone. So of course Annie calls her over to show her that she's crazy and laughs it off before going into her house. Feeling slightly creeped out, Laurie can't help but to peek over her shoulder as she walks forward and directly into the sheriff, Annie's dad. Now I'm no teenage girl, but if I was and I noticed some creep in a mask who I even thought was following me, I'd tell the first cop I saw. But she doesn't. They just say their pleasantries and she continues home. As she finally arrives at her house, she hears what sounds like someone whimpering in distress nearby. So she cautiously goes to investigate, and it turns out only to be a few giggling trick-or-treaters getting an early start. She smiles in relief and remarks that she's basically too old to be acting so scared on Halloween, so she lets her guard down and goes inside where she notices an open window. As she goes to close it, she notices the same man from the classroom and the car and the bush now in her neighbor's backyard staring at her again. She should definitely call the cops now, but before she can, her phone rings. She answers, and it's her friend Annie, who at first creepily says nothing and causes spooked out Laurie to hang up. She calls back and reassures Laurie that she's only being paranoid and plans to pick her up at 6:30 for their babysitting jobs. Laurie agrees to the plans and instead of immediately calling the cops, lays down for a nap. Later, Dr. Loomis visits the grave of Judith Myers and somehow confirms Michael is in Haddonfield since her headstone is now missing. Laurie and Annie are too busy smoking some weed to realize that this car who's been following Laurie is right behind them once again. She also mentions that she noticed someone standing in her neighbor's yard. So they choke on their weed as they drive up to the sheriff, who mentions someone has broken into a hardware store. They stole some knives, ropes, and a mask, but he's pretty sure it's just some kids. So the girls leave just as soon as Loomis arrives. He greets the sheriff and the two make plans to have a conversation about Michael, who drives right past behind Loomis's back. The sun is going down and it looks like the weed smoke didn't help Laurie's nerves at all, but instead made them worse because she's now wondering if the sheriff could smell it and begins stressing about what to wear to an upcoming school dance. Annie, being the great friend that she is, teases her a bit, and Michael follows them all the way until they arrive at their destination after sunset. The killer pulls in right behind them and watches the adults leave for the night, confirming that Annie will be alone. Meanwhile, the doctor and the sheriff arrive at the Myers house together. They find out Michael has been here, and he's been eating a dog. Loomis tells the sheriff, about how Michael is, in his expertise, nothing but pure evil. But along with that, he decides not to alert the rest of the police force, in order to avoid panic. Now, I know I said we were scoring Laurie's decisions, but I just wanted to Dr. Loomis just for fun here. Back at the Doyle's house, Laurie's reading Tommy a story and he asks about the boogeyman just as the phone rings. Of course, it's Annie, and she's got big news about the school dance that gets interrupted by Lester, the family dog, who's now barking like crazy. She thinks he just doesn't like her, but Lester's actually barking because he can tell there's someone outside. While they chat, Tommy peeks out the window and gets a glimpse of the boogeyman staring from across the street. He does exactly what he should and goes to tell Laurie. She checks, but sure enough, he's gone. As someone who's been on the receiving end of Michael's disappearing act at least twice today, you might expect Laurie to be a little more open to the possibility of Tommy seeing it too. But instead, she tells him there's no one out there and to go watch TV. While distracted on her phone, Annie spills popcorn butter on herself, so she undresses near this window where Michael gets a front row seat to the peep show. But he gets a little too excited and I'm sure if he could feel anything right now, it would probably be embarrassed. So he decides to try a different angle. But the falling planter had already alerted Lester, who's now outside, barking directly at Michael. But he literally eats dogs for breakfast, so he stops Lester's barking pretty quickly. Tommy and Laurie tune into a different John Carpenter film. When Tommy mentions that he saw the boogeyman again, Laurie assures him he's not real, but she's there to protect him anyway, and she's not about to let anything happen to him.
Promise?
Promise.
Annie heads out back to the wash house to start cleaning her clothes she spilled on. She ends up locked inside and eventually stuck in a window trying to escape. This girl, Lindsay, whose parents trusted Annie to babysit, takes a call. So she heads out back to rescue Annie from the window so she can get to the phone. It's Paul, whose parents just left, and he convinces Annie to come pick him up. So she tells Lindsay that she's taking her to watch movies at Tommy's house with Laurie for a while. And of course, Michael watches as they cross the street to the Doyles. Once inside, Annie heads to the kitchen where she finds Laurie carving a jack-o'-lantern. She tells her she's dropping Lindsay off for an hour to go pick up her sneaky link Paul.
My Paul.
But she doesn't go very far, because Block and Michael is already in the back seat with a completely different set of plans. During their movie, Tommy decides to hide behind a curtain to try to scare Lindsay, but he glances back through the window and receives a scare of his own, which is Michael carrying Annie's body. He freaks out and yells to Laurie that he saw the boogeyman for a third time, to which she yells back,
there's no such thing as the boogeyman, and also threatens to put him to bed if he doesn't calm down. Like I said, this is the third time Tommy mentioned seeing the boogeyman. Laurie has also seen him 3 times herself, and her friend Annie kept doubting her, only for her to turn around and do the same thing to Tommy.
Nobody believes me.
Dr. Loomis scares these bully kids away from the Myers house and looks pretty satisfied by it. The sheriff gets tired of waiting around for what seems like a typical Halloween. He says it would take a little more than some fancy talk to keep him up all night.
Remember this scene when Laurie bumped into the sheriff moments after seeing Michael right in the area but didn't tell him? Imagine if she had. He'd have a little more to go on than just Loomis's word, and probably would have known to check in on Laurie right about now. Not to mention, his daughter is the one who just got choked out a few minutes ago. Linda and this guy Bob arrive at the house to meet Annie, and Michael watches them make out while Laurie experiences some FOMO for being inside with the kids, while she sees all of her friends coming together to have all the fun. Once the fun's over, Linda sends Bob to the kitchen for some beers, but he notices an open door and goes to investigate. Unfortunately, he finds what he's looking for. So Michael turns him into wall decor and takes a moment to admire his work. He then walks in on Linda in his new Halloween costume. And can we just take a second to appreciate this? I almost want to give Michael a point here just for being hilarious. Like, did he really take a moment to cut those little eye holes out? Anyway, Linda thinks it's just Bob being funny until it goes on long enough for her to think it's weird. So she decides to check in with Laurie to find out where everyone else is. Just as Laurie answers, Sheet Ghost Michael walks up and chokes Linda out with the phone cord, and Laurie listens to the whole thing. She first thinks it's Annie being weird on the phone again, but the sudden silence and perhaps Michael's faint breathing on the other end of the line rose some concern. So she hangs up and peeks out the window across the street to where her friends are, and decides to call back but then gets no answer. This would be another good time to call 911. The phone is already in her hand and she really should alert the sheriff, who's been wasting time with Dr. Loomis back at the Myers house. It's his cops who should be checking in on Annie, Linda, and Bob being slaughtered at the house across the street. But instead, Laurie decides to leave the kids in bed, grab her keys, and go check on her friends all by herself. Meanwhile, Dr. Loomis finds that nurse's stolen car somewhere in the neighborhood, but still can't find Michael. As Laurie approaches the house where her friend should be, she notices the front door is locked, so she checks around the back. She enters the pitch-black house through an open door and heads inside to look for her friends. And after initially finding no one, she decides to search upstairs. When she gets to the bedroom, she finally finds her friend Annie. She's unfortunately dead already and spread out on the bed with Judith Myers' missing headstone now propped up above her. So with all of her paranoia from the day now becoming a reality, Laurie freaks out and stumbles back into a wall right behind her. Here she finds a dead Bob swinging upside down from inside of a closet, and then she stumbles over to Linda's body stuffed inside of a different one. Laurie's now in the thick of it. She's isolated in a dark house and has just found 3 fresh bodies, so it's understandable for her not to be doing her best thinking at this point. However, she should still have some sense of awareness that would tell her to get out of that house immediately, because instead she cowers in the corner as Michael appears in the room behind her and stabs her in the shoulder, causing her to fall over the banister and down the stairs, injuring her leg. The chase is on now, so she makes her way back through the house and tries the front door. It's locked, so she heads to the kitchen and remembers to lock this door behind her. However, she struggles to open the back door because of a rake Michael must have placed there to trap her in. He starts to break through the locked door and lets himself in. So quick-thinking Laurie breaks a glass panel to knock back the rake and free herself. As she makes it back outside, she runs and screams for help. Great choice. But she also trips over nothing. Getting back to her feet, she stumbles to the neighbor's doorstep, who for sure hear her because they turn on the porch light. But they, for whatever reason, decide not to help and turn it right back off. Feeling helpless, she heads back to the Doyle's house, a house she can for sure get inside of. While it may seem smart to go back to a home base, so to speak, it's not exactly the smartest choice to have the killer chase you there, especially since there's sleeping children inside. She also lost her keys somewhere along the way. So desperate to get inside, she thinks quickly again and throws a planter at Tommy's window. It gets his attention, and he comes downstairs to help her inside. She locks the door, screams at Tommy to get upstairs, turns off the light, and immediately tries the phone. It doesn't work, but the bigger concern is that she didn't check this back door, which is now cracked open. If this door was open the whole time, it would mean that she left the kids inside without locking it. But so far, she has been pretty consistent with locking the doors that she actually walks through. So checking around the back would have not only saved her time during the chase, it's probably also safe to say that coming in through this door would have caused her to lock it, and in turn prevented Michael's easy entry. So realizing her mistake just as soon as she can hear Michael breathing from somewhere inside of the house, she hides for a moment near the front of the couch and arms herself with a knitting needle. So as he appears behind her, he swings but misses, and she swings back but hits, causing him to stumble and fall forward. Since she left her needle in his neck, she trades up for the killer's own knife and double checks to see if he's dead. And once she determines he's dead enough, she proceeds to lay there on the couch for about 15 seconds, with him on the floor right behind her. She also drops the knife. Dr. Loomis tells the sheriff that he found the stolen car, and to keep searching the area. Eventually, Laurie decides to go find the kids. They ask about the boogeyman, and just as she says she killed him, he appears behind her, scaring them all. So she hides the kids in one closet, cleverly opens the back door as a diversion, and hides herself in a different closet. She even makes sure to tie it shut. Michael continues searching and eventually finds her hiding spot. He struggles with the door a little, but then decides just to break through it. As he starts making entry, Laurie reaches for a wire hanger and turns it into a weapon. She stabs him right in the eye, causing him to drop his knife. So she picks it up and uses it to stab him again, this time in the midsection. And as he falls, Laurie takes a few moments to gather herself after winning the struggle. But then she points the knife forward and makes a brave escape just past Michael lying on the floor. Unfortunately, she drops the knife again as she does this. She goes straight to Tommy and Lindsay to give them the plan, which is to go down to the Mackenzies and tell them to send the cops. And they do as she says, which ultimately gets them away from the killer and alerts Dr. Loomis to where Michael is. But Laurie stays back in the house with Michael. I'm not sure why she makes this choice, because if she was trying to make sure he was dead, she would have delivered some sort of death blow to the head just to make certain. Or if she was just watching him until the cops came, she wouldn't sit there with her back turned to him, or at least would have kept his knife. So as she sits there defenseless, of course Michael wakes up and immediately sets his sights back on her. Dr. Loomis gets his chance to be useful while Michael walks up behind Laurie and attempts his third strangulation of the night. Despite this, she manages to rip his mask off, and as he stops to put it back on, the doctor shows up with his human hole puncher, hitting Michael 5 times and sending him over the balcony, finally putting an end to Laurie's Halloween nightmare, at least for now. While in the beginning it did take Laurie a while to catch on to the danger, so much that it got all of her friends killed, in the end when it mattered, she remained on top of things and used her quick thinking to save not only herself, but the 2 kids that she was responsible for. So we gave Laurie Strode a survival rating of 30 out of 100. Let me know if you agree in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe for more videos.